Hi, and welcome to Godly Play from Miss Leah's living room. I am so excited to do this with you guys. I'm really enjoying telling these stories, and I know that it's helped me. I've never told all of the stories all together. Usually I've shared this with other teachers, so this is the first time I've been able to tell all of the stories of knowing Jesus in a new way, and it really has been meaningful to me. So I hope that you kids and maybe some of you parents that have been watching are getting something out of this, and it's really helping you think about what it would have been like to be one of the disciples, and what that time between Jesus's resurrection and the time when he ascended into heaven, what would that have been like to be with Jesus during that time? So this is the last Sunday in the season of Easter, which means that next week, I think it's Pentecost. So this is an exciting time in the church year. And so we are going to go ahead and get started with our story. Remember, it's been growing. And so our cloth where we tell our story is going to be quite large today. So let's go ahead and begin. Are you guys ready to worship God? On the first Sunday of knowing Jesus in a new way, we remember the women who went to the tomb on the very first Easter, on Resurrection Sunday. On the way there, they wondered what they would do and how they would get to Jesus with the spices they had to put on his body. But when they got there, the stone that had been over the door was rolled away, and inside there was nothing, only the linen that had been wrapped around Jesus' body. But where was Jesus? And they knew him in his absence. The women went back to tell the disciples, and John and Peter came back, and Mary Magdalene was with them. And they saw the empty tomb, and they left. But Mary Magdalene stayed behind, and she was the first to see the risen Christ and to know that Jesus was alive again. On the second Sunday of Easter, we told the story of the disciples who, on the way to Emmaus, were with a stranger who opened the scriptures to them, and together they wondered about all that had happened in Jerusalem over the last 3 days. They wondered about the death of Jesus and the empty tomb. And when they reached Emmaus, the stranger ate dinner with them, and he broke bread, and the disciples' eyes were open, and they knew that they had been with Jesus himself. And they went all the way back to Jerusalem to tell the others about what they had seen. And then Jesus appeared to all of the disciples who were gathered together in a room. He even came in through the closed door. But one of the disciples was not there. That was Thomas. And Thomas said, "If I do not see his hands, and if I cannot touch his side, I cannot believe that Jesus is alive again." Well, a week later, Jesus came again when the doors were closed, and he went directly to Thomas. And when he was near Thomas, he held out his hands, and he showed Thomas his side, and he asked him, "Thomas, do you believe?" And Thomas said, "Yes, Lord, I do believe. I do believe." And then Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. After that, the disciples went to Galilee, which is where they were from. And most of the disciples had been fishermen before they followed Jesus. And so one night, Peter said, "I'm going fishing." And the other disciples helped him with the boat, and they went out on the water, the Sea of Galilee. But all night they caught nothing. And early the next morning they noticed that someone was on the shore, and they saw the thin smoke of a fire burning there. And the stranger called out and asked them if they had caught anything. They had to tell him no. Then the stranger told them to throw their nets on the other side. And when they did, their nets were so full of fish that they could barely carry them back into the boat. And John, he turned to Peter and he said, "It's the Lord." And Peter jumped into the water and swam and ran all the way to Jesus. And the disciples had breakfast with Jesus there on the shore. And they knew that that stranger was Jesus himself. And then Jesus met them on a mountain there near Galilee. And he said some things. He said, "All authority in heaven and on earth is given to me." What was he saying, they wondered. And then he said something that they weren't quite ready to hear, but they knew it was true. He said, "Go and make disciples. Tell them my story so that they can be a part of it. Baptize all who believe and welcome them into the family." And then Jesus was gone. And the disciples began to head to Jerusalem. On the way, they realized what Jesus had been saying. They had been sheep, but now they must become shepherds. They had been followers, but now they must become leaders. And they wondered if they would ever be home again as they were to go out and tell others about who Jesus was. Now, when the disciples got to Jerusalem, they went to a room, and Jesus was already there. And while they were talking with Jesus, Jesus led them out of the room, and he led them through the streets of Jerusalem and out the city gates into the countryside, up on a hill, maybe near Bethany. And when they got to the top of the hill, the disciples began to gather around Jesus. And Jesus held out his hands, and he looked at each of the disciples and he blessed them. And then he withdrew from them, and a cloud came, and Jesus went up into heaven and was gone. For a long time, the disciples stood there looking up into the sky until a voice said, "What are you looking at?" And then they felt a little silly, because what were they doing? Looking for something that was no longer there. And then there were two strangers dressed in white, and they told the disciples that this was Jesus, but that he was no longer there in the way that they had known him, that they were to go back to Jerusalem and wait for the Holy Spirit. And so the disciples began to head back to Jerusalem, and they wondered about this Holy Spirit. What would it be like? How would they know when the Holy Spirit had come? And what would things be like now that Jesus was gone? I wonder if there might be something that you would add to this story, or if there's a question that you might have about anything that we have been talking about. Now, next week is one of my favorite Sundays of the year. So I hope that you guys will come back. I will also have story time this week on Monday and Wednesday. So don't forget, you can join me for story time with Miss Leah at 3 o'clock on Monday and Wednesday, and then again for Godly Play next week. I'd love to hear from you guys, so if you want to drop a comment in the comments, I would love to know how you're doing and that you're watching. And I hope to be with you guys again soon. So long. Bye-bye.